Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to a weekly reading wrap-up. Oh my gosh, I finally got that right. My brain is still in bed and I've been sitting here trying to record my usual intro a million times over and it's just not been going well. This week is going to be relatively brief, perhaps because my brain can't handle talking about more, but I only read 4 books and they're relatively short and I don't have a lot to say about most of them here. One of them, More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon, I'm going to do a separate video on, so I'm not going to say much about it here. This is one of the SF Masterwork titles and I did recently kick off my project to read as many of the SF Masterworks as possible. I would say that this book is mostly interesting for its context, to consider what it's doing differently and perhaps more progressively than other fiction of the time, of the 1950s, but I didn't find the story to be particularly interesting on its own, or the narrative didn't really pull me in. So more on this one later. Next, I finished the Modern Masters of Science Fiction title on Kim Stanley Robinson. This is written by Robert Markley. This one, despite quite enjoying what Markley had to say about Robinson's body of work, I don't have much to say about it. This is the single most academic book I have read in this line so far. I said that about the one on Joanna Russ a week or two ago. No, this one takes the cake. I guess the first 3 books I read from this line on Bujold, Butler, and Banks, lots of B's there, were really accessible. Maybe they were outliers for being that way, but the ones on Joanna Russ, and particularly the one on Kim Stanley Robinson, are really hard to read in places. This is an academic analysis of Robinson's body of work, viewing him as a science fiction author and some of the really interesting things he's doing with his fiction, his themes about the environment and climate change and concepts of time and history and progress and so many things. I really enjoyed the parts of this book where Markley's passion and obvious interest in Robinson's work came through. It really made me want to read all the other things by Robinson I haven't gotten to yet, which is a pretty long list. But I felt like a lot of his meaning was obfuscated by the language that he used. This probably stuck out to me a lot because I think that Robinson's language is quite eloquent, quite simple, very easy to understand what he's trying to convey to you. He's very good at putting really complex emotions and ideas into simple words that people actually use. And there are many times in this book where Markley pulls out this really great quote by Robinson and then proceeds to write 2 whole pages of interpretation where he's rephrasing what Robinson said, but in a way that is incredibly hard to understand. It's like such a stark difference between the 2 styles and the 2 ways of saying things. Now, I'm not critiquing this for being academic. This is part of an academic line from a university press. It's going to be this way. But it definitely varied in its complexity. I think the chapter on the Mars trilogy was the most difficult to get through, and I think it had been published previously elsewhere. It was really hard to understand parts of it. I have a good vocabulary, but even I was going, what the hell does stochastic mean in this sentence? So this one, despite being interesting and having some really great things to say, I don't think that an average person is going to pick this up and get much out of it. Even I don't think I understood a lot of what Markley was actually saying, which is a shame. Otherwise, I thought it was quite a good book. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Now I want to read all the things by Kim Stanley Robinson. And then lastly, I read 2 comics. I read Giant Days Volume 12 by John Allison. This is illustrated by Max Sarin and John Allison. I much prefer Max Sarin's artwork. I think it's the last issue of this one where John Allison drew it instead, and I literally didn't recognize Susan for a while. She looks older and more well put together, I guess, in Allison's artwork. But anyway, this is the penultimate volume. I'm not going to say much about it because, you know, like we've got a whole series up until this point. I don't want to spoil anything, but it is about 3 women in university in England and their hijinks, their relationships, their friendships, and we're getting near the end where they're going to graduate and go their separate ways. I didn't think this was the best volume in terms of like really great story arcs. The issues in it were a little bit more disparate. There was less of an overall story arc in this volume, but I still continue to think it is wonderfully written. The characters are great. It's been so consistent. This is definitely one of my favorite comics, which is interesting because it's also a contemporary comic. It's not genre, it's not science fiction, it's not fantasy. It's just about young people in university, and I love it. And then I read volume 4 of Monstress. This is called The Chosen, written by Marjorie and illustrated by Takeda. I also loved this. I felt like there was a lot going on in this particular volume, and really wished that the creators would include kind of a catch-up section at the beginning of the volumes. Like, give me a cast list, because there's some characters who reappear here that if you're reading this as the issues are being published or as the volumes are being published, some of these characters you haven't seen literally in years, and I haven't reread the first 3 volumes, so I should really do that. Perhaps the most interesting thing in this volume for me is the appearance of this dude on the cover who says that he is Micah's father. Is he really? What's his part in all of this? It's very convoluted, but I still think it is a pretty fantastic series. I will always admire the artwork even if I think that the story is a little bit hard to understand or it isn't moving as fast. Just so much beautiful artwork. And that is it for this week. I have started a bazillion books. Now I need to finish more of them for next week. I'm feeling a little bit pressured for time to get all the things read, which means I need to slow down and focus on only a couple of things and just relax. It's not a job. I don't actually have any deadlines. So I should be back relatively soon with my review of More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon. I also need to do a review of The Dazzle of Day by Molly Gloss, which I'm very excited to talk about. Both of these books are ones I'm feeling a bit stressed about reviewing because I think they're talking about very important but possibly touchy subjects, and I have to make sure that I'm going to talk about them in a relatively intelligent way. Putting more pressure on myself. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you have read or want to read any of the books that I talked about today. Leave me a comment down below, and I'll be back very soon. And until then, bye.